Okay, great. So I'm going to start with showing off this beautiful art that our very own Mike Curran did. Mike did all of this custom art for our packet that we used for this seminar. So good job, Mike. That's for you. I'm so glad you guys are all here today, and I'm looking forward to sharing some winter tree ID with you. This is going to be primarily focused on how to identify trees in the winter. However, this knowledge is going to be useful year-round. I think a lot of people, when they are growing up and hanging out in the outdoors, learn to identify trees based on leaves, right? Because leaves are so easy to use most of the time. They're so unique and so charismatic. It is a really wonderful tool for especially teaching young people how to identify trees. However, for those who want to take it to the next level, it's all about the twig. And if you guys walk away from this this conversation today with one new skill, I would really think that should be how to use a twig to identify a tree. You know, trees are a very seasonal living thing, and one of the most consistent parts about them is these twigs with their buds and leaf scars and other features. So I'm going to jump right into this and start running down the features of the twig and then showing you some examples and giving you a few hints and tips along the way. So one thing that I find fascinating about twigs is their buds. Does anybody know like what a bud actually is? Feel free to unmute or answer in the chat.
Isn't it where the leaf pops out?
That is one feature of a leaf. Yep.
Bill and Kristen in the chat said a flower? Question mark?
All right. Yes, you got another option for a bud. They are a piece of undifferentiated plant material. So kind of like stem cells in human development, you know, we've got these cells that are sort of amorphous and able to change into whatever our body needs them to be. That's what a bud is on a tree. They sort of emerge from these little nodes as the twig grows, and then as the tree continues to develop them, it says, oh wow, this place is getting a lot of sunshine. This would be a great spot for a leaf, right? And so then that bud differentiates into a leaf, and you get a leaf from that bud. If it's not getting a lot of sunlight, but it's in a really, you know, showy location where pollinators might have great access to it, it will become a flower bud and a fruit bud. Buds also turn into new twigs as well. So those are sort of the three major ways that a bud can develop. And on some trees, you can actually tell what the bud is going to turn into if you're far enough into its development. Buds are on the tree almost year round. They show up sort of like early summer, I would say, after flowering and fruiting has come to a completion, or at least like fruits are on the tree, basically. That's typically where buds start to develop. So the only time you're not going to find them is while the tree is flowering and leafing out. However, at that point, you've got leaves and flowers to identify from, which are, like I said, you know, really big, charismatic things that are typically easier to use than buds. However, if you know the bud, you can identify the tree almost the entire year round. So I think buds are fascinating, and I'm still learning more about them as I teach these classes. But I think if anybody asks you for a cool piece of tree trivia, as you are now going to be tree experts, that would be a really cool one to point them to, especially if you use the word undifferentiated. They will have their minds blown. So,
Andrew, I have a question from the
yeah,
chat.
please.
I think it's from Rebecca, and Rebecca is asking, could you call them a node?
You could call them a node, yes. I think that would be reasonable. The technical term would be bud, but I think I would call the site that they develop from a node most of the time, I think. I don't think that's a technical term though. Not that I know of anyway. Buds arrange themselves in different ways on twigs. The tree has a genetic plan as it's developing the twig as to where buds and leaf scars and other things will show up. And that's programmed into its DNA as to how the twigs develop. But we can use that to our advantage to help identify trees. In this image where Mike has traced over some of the twigs that we found, we're showing two different types of arrangement here. One is opposite and one is alternate. So alternate arrangement on a twig means that buds are coming out of the twig in a sort of like left-right arrangement, right? And they're typically not directly across from each other. Whereas opposite twigs, the buds are almost always directly across from each other and parallel on the twig. In nature, alternate plants are, or at least in our environment in Minnesota, alternate trees are more common than opposite trees. And so we're able to use a handy little acronym for identifying opposite trees. So you walk up to a tree, you take a look at the twig, and you're like, oh, this is opposite, great. So that already narrows you down to a very small amount of tree families. The basic version of this acronym is MAD, M-A-D, which stands for maple, ash, and dogwood. So we're actually going to have a couple of maples today, as well as an ash tree. So 3 out of 5 of our plants today will be opposite arrangement, which is not typical for Minnesota, but in the floodplain, these trees happen to be dominating. So Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we just got a couple questions, Andrew. The first one, which I think you have really good pictures of later on in the presentation, but Renoir is wondering what features on the bud can one tell what the bud will eventually become? So how do you know what's going to become?
I do have an excellent picture of that coming up. Yep, I will show you guys that one in a moment.
Cool. And then a couple more questions. So we'll see more of that. And then another question is, does the lack of nutrients in the soil or lack of sunlight diminish the appearance or timing of budding?
Yeah, I almost certainly think it would. We see that a lot on street trees, especially here in Minnesota. The most common thing in the soil that trees in the Twin Cities are dealing with is a lot of salt, extra salt in the soil because of our road salting, right? So you'll see that altered development. I don't know if it's specific to buds. I can't say that for sure. But I do see delayed development and irregular development in especially a lot of maple trees that grow on boulevards. Maple trees are pretty sensitive to that salt that comes off, but people just love maple trees. So they got to have them on their boulevard, but oftentimes that salt does end up, tainting their development to some degree. They can still grow up and be strong and healthy, but yeah, I don't doubt that a soil composition could affect budding out in a big way, for sure.
Cool. And then I have one more question, which is from John, and it's, do buds on shrubs serve the same purpose as tree buds? Yes.
Yep, they are analogous. Yep. I don't know of any differences between the two.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Great questions. Thank you guys for asking so many. I love going back and forth. Okay, so we're on MAD, maple, ash, and dogwood. We don't have any dogwoods today, but you'll know if you find an alternate plant or an opposite plant in the wild, that could narrow you down when you're furiously Googling for an answer. Alternate versus opposite, I've covered the basics of that. I'm going to show you another photo here in a moment. And then the other thing I want to talk about is leaf scars. And this photo is good, but I actually want to show you this slide first. So a leaf scar on a twig is another really excellent identifier. I'd say buds and leaf scars are the two most important in combination with the alternate versus opposite arrangement. they're so unique to most plants. And they, I don't know why, I always end up like looking at them as faces, just because I'm a human and facial recognition patterns help me remember things. But you know, I take a look at black walnut over on the far left here, right? That is a super unique leaf scar. I love that it has this goofy little smile next to like two little eyes. And I still, to this day, when I am suspecting something is a black walnut, I grab the twig, I take a look at the leaf scar, it's got a goofy little smile looking at me. I know that's a black walnut. After I've used the leaf scar, I can double check that with the buds and the alternate arrangement of the plant. But a leaf scar gets me there immediately, and that's something that not some other features don't do. There's some cool little bits to a leaf scar. You guys, I mean, the goofy little smile and the dots are cute and all, but what they essentially are is the connection point for the vascular system of the leaf. So where the leaf is exchanging nutrients and water with the plant, that is what those little marks are in the leaf scar. And every tree does it differently, which is really fascinating. So we take a look at box elder next, which is one of our plants on the list, as you guys know. And box elder has this skinny little leaf scar, right, that's hanging out just underneath the bud. One thing that's unique about the box elder, though, as well as most other maple trees, is that the leaf scar meets in the middle. So if you look at the bottom part of the twig, can you guys see my mouse, by the way?
Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, excellent. That's so helpful. Yeah. So at the bottom set of buds down here, notice they're opposite because box elder is in the maple family. They actually meet in the middle. And when you see the leaves on these plants, which you will in the spring, you can see that the leaves actually do touch each other at the middle of the plant. So that is another feature you can use to sort of narrow yourself down to maple right there. If the leaf scars are connecting in the middle, which is you know, more common on opposite plants, but for maples it's pretty consistent. You'll know you're looking at a maple tree. And then finally, I want to show you guys green ash over on the far right here. There's another tree we're looking at today with another kind of unique leaf scar. So you can see we've got these big brown buds on the plant, and then underneath is sort of this smiley face shape, right? And you can see the little itty bitty dots inside of that where the vascular system of the leaf connects up to. I always look at this as, yeah, it's sort of like a smiley clown face, and Becca's going to have a really good image later showing you guys the difference between some ash trees and the morphology of their leaf scars that can point you in the right direction. So yeah, that is sort of the basic rundown on leaf scars. Things you're looking for are general shape, whether they're connected to each other, and the pattern of their little vascular system dots. For those who have, you know, eyesight that's not as, you know, 20/20, the vascular system's not quite as helpful, but I usually don't even need to get that far into depth. A combination of buds and the shape of the leaf scar can very often get you to the right direction most of the year. I want to look at these buds really quick too, just because somebody asked the question about the differentiation of buds. On the left, we've got silver maple, which we'll be talking about later. And you can see some of the ways that we describe buds. The silver maple buds have this really fine hair in between their scales. You guys see that? That is something that you can look for when you're describing a bud. The color is really important when describing the bud. These are sort of a magenta, beautiful, beautiful red, and are orb in shape, right? They're very, very round. Where some plants, like cottonwood on the right, have very pointy looking buds. Other things we look for are scales on buds. Some plants have very naked buds. I'm trying to think of a good example right now. I don't have a good one coming to mind, but some of them look like just straight fleshy plant material without any sort of protective coating on them. But many plants have these sort of bud scales, which is their technical name, bud scales, that cover up the more vulnerable parts of the newly developing piece of the plant. On the right with the cottonwood, there's a few more really cool things we can look at. So the shape of a cottonwood, very, very conical, very like pine cone-ish almost, with a strong point. They have a few scales that are much larger than a silver maple scales, and they also have the I have a very strong tactile memory of squeezing cottonwood buds when I was a little kid. I'd find the twigs all over the playground, right? And I'd love to squeeze them because they just ooze out this like sticky liquid. That's another excellent way to identify a cottonwood tree. It's sort of a layering of these different things that'll get you to the right answer. But I know if I squeeze a big juicy green bud and I get a bunch of oozy sticky liquid coming out, I know it's probably a cottonwood tree. As somebody asked, can you tell what buds are going to turn into? With some plants, you absolutely can. So with this cottonwood image, it's a perfect example of the twig on the left having buds that are going to turn into catkins, which is the fruit of the cottonwood tree, and the ones on the right turning into leaves. So yeah, especially cottonwoods, which have these like huge exploding flowers that come out, it's really obvious to tell which ones are going to be flowers and which ones are going to be leaves. Whereas the silver maple on the left here, they're a little less easy to tell, I would say. However, I know just based on silver maple biology that these really big clusters, especially at the tips of the buds on these, we call these little spurs, where it's just a little itty bitty twig that comes off and has a bunch of buds on it. I know these are likely to be flower buds just because of the way that silver maple grows. Does anybody have any other questions on leaf scars or buds? I know I'm going relatively fast, but I want to try and respect everybody's time today too. So please feel free to chime in with questions if you have them. Okay, so everybody knows first things we look for: opposite versus alternate arrangement. Take a peek at the buds and then follow up with some leaf scars. Will very likely get you to the right place if you know what you're looking for.
Andrew, I have a question from Mary in the chat, which is, do female cottonwoods also have sticky buds?
They do. And I'm going to be talking to you guys and showing you some photos of the differences between male and female cottonwoods later on in the presentation, actually. So cottonwoods are what we call dioecious, which I'll have typed out on the screen. Man, I was third grade spelling bee runner-up champion, but I don't know if I can spell dioecious off the top of my head. So anyway, I'll brag about that until the day I die. Okay, moving on from leaf scars and buds for the moment. So there's a few other things to a twig that are sort of secondary. I put those first three things in the primary group, the first things I'll look at when I go for a twig. But there's sort of these follow-up things that will continue to get you down the right path. Have you guys ever seen a dichotomous key of plants? I think I have one on my bookshelf right next to me. Yeah, here it is. So it's basically, this is especially how they used to do it back in the day, and we use this in class. I know you can't read this because it's probably backwards and terrible, but basically what's going on here is that you start at the very beginning of the book, and it's like, is the plant alternate versus opposite? And then you choose the right path. And then the next question is the bud scaled and pointy? And you're like, no, it's not. And then it'll take you to a different place. That's sort of what we're building here. And typically in those dichotomous keys, like they're called, these sort of lenticels and pith things will be a little bit further down the key. So it should be further down the key in your mind as well. So a lenticel is the first thing we'll talk about here. I've got an example with the silver maple and the black cherry here. One of them being on the twig and one of them being on the trunk of the tree. A lenticel is essentially a pore on a twig. So this is a site of gas exchange with the outside world. which is something that every plant needs, but they all accomplish it in a relatively, unique way. So every plant will have lenticels, but not every plant will have them clearly visible or useful for identification. Black cherry is an excellent example because Becca and I, when we were in conservation corps together, we cut down a lot of buckthorn, and oftentimes we were using brush saws, sort of like a weed whipper, but with a saw blade on it. And when you were flying through the forest cutting down buckthorns, you had to be really careful that you weren't cutting down black cherry because they look remarkably similar. The best way to tell at a distance a black cherry from a buckthorn was the lenticels on the bark. If you notice the lenticels on the bark, then you can follow up and double check the twig and make sure you're looking at a cherry tree and not a buckthorn. In those instances, they can be the quickest path to finding the correct answer. The silver maple lenticels probably aren't going to help you so much. You're already probably going to get there with the buds and the leaf scars. But yeah, like black cherry could come in really handy. None of the trees today, we do have silver maple on our list, but none of the other ones have really prominent lenticels. But I'd just like you guys to know that that is a feature you can use. And if it comes up in an ID book or something that you're using, you'll know what you're looking at. The last thing I want to talk about for twigs is the pith. So the pith is sort of the inner, most inner structure of a twig. Typically, if you were to just snip off a twig and take a look at the pith, it's probably just a small brown dot, usually. However, some plants have really unique piths. The cottonwood is an excellent example of that, and I'll show this again later and remind you of this, but the cottonwood has a star-shaped pith, an almost perfectly 5-pointed star-shaped pith. In this instance, it is a lightning bolt for identification. Like if you suspect that a tree is cottonwood and you clip through the twig and find a star-shaped pith, you're there. There's no doubt in your mind that you're looking at a cottonwood now. Most of the time, I've usually identified that it's a cottonwood before that, but I'm just trying to show off for my friends, and then I show them a star-shaped pith, and that is pretty impressive. So you can now impress your friends with this trick as well. Now you just have to start carrying a clipper with you everywhere you go, like I do.
Andrew, I know this course is focused on Minnesota trees, but there are lots of other species of cottonwoods in North America.
Mm-hmm.
Is this code or this key or trick about identifying cottonwood by the pith, is that common to all cottonwoods, do you know?
That is a really good question. I don't have a definite answer for you. I have only worked with Eastern/Plains cottonwood, and I know it to be perfectly true for that one. For the other ones, though, I'd love to look that up, actually. Becca, are you on Google duty right now?
See what I can find.
We'll see if maybe Becca can dig up an answer for us.
Okay.
I would love to know that, too. That's a really good question. Does anybody else have questions about lenticels or the pith right now? Pith is typically also one of the very secondary things. It oftentimes is not going to help a whole lot, but in some cases, it is a light bulb for sure. Okay, dokily. So, in fact, Becca, maybe I got you coming up right now for green ash, so I could relieve you of your Googling duty and leave you to your ash trees if you like.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to exit screen sharing then. And just want to give one more opportunity to ask questions about twigs while we get Becca ready to go on starting on trees. The ability to identify a tree by a twig is one of the single most important things I learned in my entire college career. And I can say that with a lot of confidence. It really has gotten me where I am today in a big way. So if you can get that skill down, you'll be in a really great place for ID. And Becca, feel free to take it away whenever you want.
What's the name of the, real quick, sorry, what's the name of the tree guide you held up, Andrew?
This is a really old one, actually. This is Keys to Woody Plants from 1936. There are many, many modern versions. If you search for a dichotomous key to trees, I'll type how that is spelled. I do know that spelling. So I typed that in the chat, and if you Google something like that, you'll find something pretty good. Trees of Minnesota by Stan Tequila is sort of the baseline, and he does a really good job with a lot of his ID books. So, and I'm almost certain he has made a Trees of Minnesota.
Yep.
Okay, great. Very cool.
Awesome. Well, switching gears here a little bit, we're going to talk about the green ash tree first, but I wanted to give this time to you all. If you made any drawings of the tree you want to share, or you took any pictures that you want to hold up, feel free. Also free to take this time to shout out anything that you noticed about the green ash tree when you were looking at it, or anything that really stuck out to you. Feel free to share if you want to this moment in time. Looks like John might be pulling up a photo.
I'm trying to do. This is Rebecca. Sometimes the bark looks kind of like in a diamond shaped pattern to me on a green ash. Is that correct?
Yes, that is excellent. Good for you for noticing that. Yep, that's a defining feature of the ash tree, is that its bark does kind of grow in those diamond ridges. And I have a picture that we can look at just so that everyone else can be sure they see that too.
I was really struck by the blonding of the bark on the ash down in Crosby. It's quite visible.
Yes, Crosby has a lot of trees that are infected with emerald ash borer, the insect that creates that blonding. And I'm sure once you notice it on one tree, you start to notice it on a lot of the trees at Crosby, and it becomes very...
Is the blonding a kind of late stage of infection? I don't see that on the boulevard trees on Cretin Avenue in St. Paul, but they're all marked as, I think, to be taken down.
Yes, blonding is definitely more of the late stage. That means that there's a lot of those EAB larvae in there that the woodpeckers are trying to get out. So it'll definitely start at the top of the tree. So that's where you'll start to see the blonding. And then as the infestation gets worse and worse, it'll go down the trunk of the tree, even all the way to the bottom. So the ones at Crosby, I'm sure you noticed, were very blonde all over. So very late stage infestation there.
I was down there yesterday, and it sounded, if you just stopped walking and crunching on the snow and listened, you could hear woodpeckers, just like a choir of them, removing bark from the trees down there. It was pretty cool to see, but also, you know, a big issue. And then also Jim in the chat says the tree has basket looking bark, which is a good observation. And I know the black ash is used pretty extensively by a number of indigenous communities in the Midwest to use it for basket making. So as the ash tree faces its demise, or, you know, potential demise, it brings up a lot of cultural issues as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share my screen here.
Real quick, as you're getting ready to do that, you mentioned the woodpeckers getting at those bugs. Never made the connection before you said that, but there's a tree that I can see right out the window here in my neighbor's yard. And it turns out it's a green ash. I just looked at it in the binoculars too. And it's got a lot of blonding, and it's had a lot of woodpeckers lately.
Oh, yep. I bet the EAB is in there. The woodpeckers are filling their bellies. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm hoping you can see my screen here. So yeah, I think a lot of you brought up what we mentioned in the guide, which was that bark blonding. A lot of ash trees in their form also have that early split in the trunk where they kind of create that Y. Not all of them, but a lot of them, you can see that happen. And we are going to go a little more deeper into the twigs of the ash tree. But before we start that, I just wanted to give a few more extra identifiers that can come in handy to find out if you're looking at a green ash tree or not. So the first one that I want to talk about is on the left here. And these are called Samaras. And these are actually the fruit of the tree. And so ash trees have Samaras as well as maples. So we're going to look at a couple different ones, and they're all differently shaped. So they're a really good identifier tool if they're on the tree. And they usually appear in the summer and fall. They can stick around during the winter and hang on to the tree. So you might see a few of them on the tree if you're lucky. When it comes to green ash Samaras, they're very long and skinny and singular. So that's kind of how I recognize them. You might know Samaras by a different term called helicopters or whirligigs, because they're the seeds that you throw up in the air and then they whirl down. Super fun. Ash trees are not the best helicopters. I would probably pick a maple Samara if I was looking at the helicopter competition. And then also you'll see here, like Rebecca brought up, that bark. I included a picture of the bark that doesn't have any blonding, just in case the Crosby ones were too much. But what you can see here is there is a slight diamond pattern going on in this bark. You get a little more better at recognizing it once you look at enough green ash trees, but that is a very distinct way of identifying them. And then I also did want to talk a little bit more about emerald ash borer or EAB itself. It sounds like a lot of you have heard of EAB. It's a pretty common thing. The DNR has been good about educating the public on that front. But the actual insect itself is an invasive pest from Asia. I think it looks rather pretty, as you can see up here in the corner. It has that bright iridescent green. So it's pretty beautiful despite how much harm it causes. And that's the adult form. But what really kills the tree is its larva form that you see in the bottom here, that kind of white little worm. And so when the adults lay their eggs into the tree, that larva will eat away at the inside of the tree, at the vascular system of the tree. So that's the part of the tree that is responsible for transporting nutrients throughout the tree. So if you have a pest that's eating away at that, it's really going to damage the tree. And that's why so many of the ash trees die, because they just get too damaged. As you can see in this middle part, these are the galleries that that larva causes. And they're these big S shapes where they've just eaten away at all that material inside the bark. So get ready for the next picture here. Don't want to scare anybody, but watch out. There he is. So in the corner, you'll see there's a little EAB insect peeking his head out of one of its holes that it puts into the tree. So this is also another distinct feature that can help you decide if the tree is an ash tree, because when the EAB bores into the tree to lay its eggs, it creates this very distinct D-shaped hole that's very large. It's a lot larger than what other insects will make, because there are other boring insects, but they will usually create a smaller circular hole in the tree. But when it comes to EAB, they create this large sideways D-shape. So that's another good way to tell if it's an ash tree, or just to tell if your ash tree is infected with EAB, is if you really start seeing those holes down there. So keep an eye out for those.
What's the approximate size on that hole?
It's usually about, I would say, 1/4 of an inch to maybe 1/2 inch at time. It might be a little too big, but definitely for sure like 1/4. Yeah, you'll notice them because compared to any of the others, they're usually just a lot larger. So that's how you can tell. So next, we want to really get into the twig here. And I decided that it might be helpful to do a comparison between green ash and black ash. So Minnesota, we have 3 different types of ash trees, green, black, and white. And so the most common ones that you're going to find in our park are green and black. I think at Crosby, it's mostly just green ash there. So those are the ones that you were looking there. But at a lot of other parks, you might often see black ash as well. Those are the 2 common ones. Whereas white ash is usually more of like a boulevard tree or a backyard tree. And they're a lot less common to find just in natural areas. So let's really take a deep dive into the buds and the leaf scars of the green ash. The green ash is on the left. So as we mentioned in our guide, the green ash has that really distinct chocolate chip bud on the very top, the terminal bud, the very top bud. And so I've always thought it looks like a chocolate chip. Don't eat it, it's not tasty, but it definitely looks like one. And then also, as you can see down here, it is oppositely arranged. So the buds are right across from each other. So I always look for that chocolate chip at the top, as well as the 2 buds oppositely arranged. Another thing though is the leaf scar, which is right here below that top bud. As Andrew was saying, it is kind of easy to remember them as faces. So I always think of this one as an open smile. Like, I am very happy. The ash tree is very happy. It has a big smile on its face. So that is how I remember it. Or you can think of a sideways D as well. But when you look at the black ash, it's still very similar. The buds are very similar color and similar shape. I often think that the black ash buds look a bit more like a deer hoof almost instead of a chocolate chip. It's a very slight difference, but it is noticeable. But the really big difference is in that leaf scar. As you can see, comparing this super round leaf scar, more of the, oh, shocked face, surprise, of the black ash to that smile on the green ash. So that's kind of going to be the biggest defining factor when you're trying to decide, oh, am I looking at a green ash or a black ash? So definitely keep those ones in mind. However, we don't want to forget about the white ash, even though it is less common. So on the left here is the white ash. And I always think of this one as just a really big closed mouth smile. It's really cute. And again, the terminal bud is a brown color and does look a bit like a chocolate chip, but it's a little more rounded, I would say, than the green ash bud is. But otherwise very similar. But really where you're gonna know the difference is at those leaf scars. They are all very distinctly shaped. So let's go from the left. You have the white ash here and that little smile. Then you go to the black ash and you have your O face. And then you get to the green ash and you have your open mouth, big smile. So that's a really good way, and this is a really good picture that really helps show those differences of those leaf scars. So definitely keep that in mind if you know you're looking at an ash tree, but maybe you're not quite sure what type of ash it is. Take a close look at those leaf scars and you will find out. It's definitely something good. And another thing quickly, even though this is winter ID, I did just want to throw in that green ash trees versus white ash trees, their fall color is a lot different. So in green ash and also black ash, the trees are going to turn more of a yellow color, the leaves are. But for white ash, they turn this really beautiful red, purple color. So that's kind of a distinct difference that you can keep an eye out for in the fall, is that different leaf colors. So green and black, more yellow leaves, and then the white ash have more red leaves in the fall. Just a good.
We have a question from the chat, which is, are there lenticels on all these ashes? Are they? Can you notice them? Maybe that last slide.
Yeah, I think you can notice them pretty well on this last slide here. They're not extremely distinct, I would say, but they do all have them a little ones kind of spread out. I think they're a lot harder to see with the naked eye, but that's why I usually focus on the leaf scar when it comes to ash trees instead of the lenticels, but they are still there and a good thing to keep an eye out for. And with that, I want to open it up to any questions on that green ash tree. If anyone had anything that came up.
This is Rebecca. It might be kind of a dumb question, but on green ash, or what I think are green ash, I often see like a lot of green moss. Is that just on every tree, or am I seeing more of that on the ash tree? So, and maybe I'm way off base.
No, I mean, that's a good observation. I don't think I've heard of moss being particularly attracted to any type of tree. I don't know, Andrew, if you know anything about that. I feel like they kind of are indiscriminately growing on just.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any moss that particularly grows on ash trees, but it is possible that wherever you're making your observations, it's more common there. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe it's just a really good environment for moss. Like it might be very moist.
We noticed that too when we went down to Crosby Farm, that it was only the ash, because on our way back out, we were trying to identify every other tree.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up. I'm gonna make another note about that.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if it has something to do with the moss having more ability to feed on a tree that's dying instead of an alive tree, since most of those ash trees are close to dead due to the EAB. That might be a reason, but not for certain on that. That's a good question, though.
We have a question about the fork in the trunk too, and whether that's common to all three ashes. So that, I think we're referring to that early split there that you noticed in the ash tree.
I think that's more common to the green ash, firstly, then maybe to the black ash, and then not really common in the white ash at all. So I would say it's more common on just the green ash, from what I've seen. All right, well, feel free to keep asking questions if they come up, but we're gonna move on to the next tree, which is the hackberry. So again, I wanna give this opportunity if you have any pictures or thoughts that came up when you were looking at those hackberry trees, feel free to shout them out or write them in the chat now. It is a very distinct looking tree. Oh, okay.
See that? I don't know.
Yeah, picture of the bark there.
Yep.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Kind of warty.
Yes,
Bark.
very warty. Very warty bark.
We called it a curly bark. It kind of mostly looked like they were all curling out.
Yeah, that's a good descriptor too, I think. Yeah, the bark is really the standout when it comes to the hackberry trees. I'm sure you noticed the bark looked different in comparison to all the other trees that we looked at. Put this up here. Yeah, the bark is really going to be the main identifying factor of the hackberry tree, just because it is so uncommon. There's not really another tree in Minnesota that has this corky wart-like bark on it. So that's probably the first thing that you're going to see. But we also want to pay attention to the twig again, just since that is such an important part. And the hackberry twigs are very zigzaggy with small buds, and we'll see a picture of them here shortly. But again, I wanted to just go into some other ways that you can identify that hackberry. I know there's leaves here, even though it's winter, but just in case you were curious, here's some hackberry leaves for you. So I first want to talk about is hackberry. It's in the name. There must be a berry on this tree, and there is. On the top right here, you'll see they have really huge berries that are usually called drupes. And they appear in the summer and into the fall, and they start out green, but then they turn into this deep red burgundy color, and by close to winter, they're more of a brown. So these berries are quite large for berries, and they're a favorite of birds and deer. They're a really good snack, and they're actually edible for humans as well. I would recommend not eating anything off a tree unless you for sure know the tree that you're looking at, just to be safe. But if you are for sure looking at a hackberry and you feel confident in that, feel free to take a nibble. They're sweet, but they're also a little crunchy and dry, and they do have big seeds. But if you're ever curious, go for it. Another thing that I wanted to talk about are often on leaves of hackberries, you'll see these galls. They're actually called nipple galls, and they're a very distinct feature of hackberries. Any trees can have galls on their leaves, but it's really common for the hackberry because of these little guys right in the middle here, these psyllid moths. These are moths that are specialized to lay their eggs on the hackberry leaves. So that's why you're usually going to see a lot more leaf galls on a hackberry leaf than maybe other types of leaves. And you might even see these little psyllid moths wandering around the tree as well. They're very inconspicuous, I would say, but it's definitely a good thing to keep an eye out for. Now, moving on, we have the twigs and the barks. So on the left, you'll see the twig here. What we really want to emphasize is the zigzag pattern of it almost. So from far away, the twigs of hackberries might look very zigzaggy, and that's because the leaf scar juts out in this angular way, and then the bud actually comes back in and is really close along this stem here. So that creates a very angular shape on the twig itself. And as you can see, the hackberry twig is also a little hairy. They have little hairs on them. So that's another good thing to keep an eye out for. You can also see some lenticels on this hackberry as well, where it's a little less hairy. So it has that really jut out, the leaf scar there, and then the bud itself lays flat against the twig. And then the terminal bud, the very top bud, is also a very distinct shape. Again, it has that hook shape to it. So that's pretty unique. And that's a really good indicator that, oh, this is a hackberry tree, if you see that hook shape at the top, the terminal bud there. So that's a good thing to keep an eye out for. And then I like that people use different words to describe the hackberry bark because it is different depending on the age of the tree. So I believe the one that we had marked was an older hackberry, a more mature hackberry. And so its bark was going to be a lot more curly, a lot more flaky almost. I think someone described it as shingles one time, kind of laying over each other. But when the tree is younger, it looks a lot more warty and a lot more bubbly almost, instead of that curly shape over here. So that's just something to keep in mind, you know, just as our skin ages, so do the trees. So just a good thing to keep in mind. And then another thing that's unique to the hackberries are these little things called witch's brooms. They are created by these small mites and powdery mildew that attach to the tree and feed on the tree. And the tree isn't really hurt by these mites or mildew. They do react to it though. So what you're seeing in this little ball of twigs is kind of a stress reaction from the tree, kind of just putting it out there as a response to those mites and mildew. So it's not harming the tree, but it is a good way to identify, oh, that's probably a hackberry if you're really far away and you see a bunch of little puff balls on it almost. I think it looks kind of cute, but it's a good way to tell if it's a hackberry, witch's broom. And lastly, just a couple fun tidbits. What you're seeing here on the left is a Hackberry Emperor. It's a specialized butterfly that only feeds on hackberry leaves. So if you are around a hackberry and you happen to see a brown butterfly and you're really good at IDing insects, it might be a Hackberry Emperor more often than not. And then also I like to include a picture of a cedar waxwing just because hackberry drupes are a favorite meal of its. And it's also a favorite of a lot of birds, but especially the cedar waxwing. Hackberries are excellent for bird watching if you're near one, so keep an eye out. So before we move on to box elder, do we have any questions on the hackberry?
One thing I'd point out is that the most similar species to hackberry that you're going to see is American elm, especially on boulevards and things. They both have those little tiny buds that cling to the twig, and it's sort of a zigzaggy pattern to their branches. But a few things that are different. One, the bark for sure. So if you see hackberry bark, it's hackberry, no doubt. And that terminal bud that Becca showed you too, with the little bend to it, that is sort of going to be your other key difference between the two. So don't get goofed up on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up about comparing it to the American elm, because after the Dutch elm disease came through, it's been kind of it's a great tree to replace it with. So you're seeing it more in urban areas and around the metro. It's also a very drought resistant tree. So just think about a changing Minnesota climate. It's a good feature adapted tree. So we'll probably be seeing a lot more of it, especially when we're thinking about what to replace all those ash with.
Do you know if any, if those drupes, those little seeds, not seeds, but fruit, if they were used by Native Americans or others for teas or anything like that, brews or poultices or whatever? Thanks.
I believe so. I'm not super informed on that. Andrew, are you looking something up right now to see? I'm pretty sure they were, just because, you know, if anything is edible, people used it.
I was also thinking about dyes too, you know,
yeah.
dye. I'm thinking it would have a purplish kind of color. I'm not sure, but if so, whatever the color it is, maybe it's used for dye.
I know that skin has that purple color, but on the inside, it's more of like a apple color, kind of just like pale, kind of like an apple texture too on the inside. So perhaps.
Something that I'm seeing off a quick Google search is actually it's talking about how the bark was used as a remedy for sore throats and to treat venereal disease. And this is saying that the Huma Indians did that. Again, just a quick Google search, but it seems like also the bark is of use.
And I just posted an article in the chat as well that you guys can check out. That suggests there's a few tribes that I'm not familiar with that they're listing here, but talking about mashing the drupes into a paste, as well as yeah, sort of mashing them up and rolling them into a ball before cooking and eating. So I can't vouch for this website per se, so you know, take it with a grain of salt. It seems like they've done their research though. So.
I'm curious about the witch's broom. You mentioned, Becca, that there's a mite and a mildew that causes it. Do they both need to be present, or that either one causes it, or is it some interaction between the two?
I believe it's either one, but I have to double check on that just to be sure.
Tamara also brought up a great point. She said that she's read that they were crushed up to make biscuits by Native Americans, and she's also seen a recipe for hackberry milk. Ooh.
Sounds good. Now I'm hungry for biscuits.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's real. What do you know? Very cool.
What do you mean, Andrew? You didn't believe me?
No, I didn't. Nope, straight up didn't believe you, Tamara. Just kidding. I absolutely believe you. That's so crazy, though. I love that. Full disclosure, Tamara is our plant in the audience. We work with her really, really frequently. So.
Yeah, awesome. Good question. Well, I think we're going to move on to the box elder maple, the last tree that I'm going to talk about before Andrew takes over. And so if anyone has any special pictures about the box elder or any notes that they had, particularly in regards to that tree, feel free to share them out now.
And we're doing pretty good on time also, Becca. We're at 11:15 right now, so.
The box elder to me said, "Don't go into this woods."
With its shape.
Yeah. Imagine all of those, I thought of like Wizard of Oz or something,
Oh yeah, very much so. Imagine like a bunch of box elders around a path that are all just curling over it. Yeah, they do have that very often curly, bendy shape to them. So yes, I agree. That's a good point. That is something that we brought up in our little guide there, was that shape of the box elder tree. But we also brought up the twig itself and how it could be very colorful, as well as the buds, which are again oppositely arranged and are fuzzy and gray a lot of the times. So I wanted to share this awesome picture that I have that I really love, that really shows that awesome array of color that you can get with box elder. So these are all box elder twigs, but as you can see, the color ranges from this lime green to these oranges to these deep, beautiful red purples down here. And so when we said that they could be colorful, we meant it. There's a lot of difference going on here. So, keep an eye out for the different colors that you might spot in a box elder. And again, what's also sticking out are the size of these buds oppositely arranged. They're very big buds, they're very gray, and I think you can even tell a little bit how kind of fuzzy they are. And if you look really closely, you can even see the leaf scar, especially on this first one here, and how it's very thin and intersects with the other one on the other side. So that's a good point right there. So yes, I really love box elder twigs. But the box elder itself is kind of what I would call a sneaky maple. Most people, since we just call it the box elder, most people often forget or don't know that, oh, it's a box elder maple, just because it doesn't look like a lot of the other maples at first glance. It doesn't have that distinct maple leaf shape. It has something a little different. It's also not as straight and tall standing as some other maples are. It has that more curvy form to it. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. But one thing, as I mentioned with the ash trees and how they had Samaras, maples also have Samaras. So on the right here, you'll see the Samaras, and you'll see how they look a lot different than the ash ones. So the box elder Samaras come in pairs, and where the ash ones are just singular. So the Samaras come in pairs, they make great helicopters. They're usually this red color instead of the green like the ash trees, but as the seasons go on and into fall and winter, they'll usually turn more of a light brown. But I often see Samaras stick on the tree throughout winter when it comes to the box elder. So I usually do look for them if I'm gonna see if a tree is a box elder or not in the winter, because a lot of the times the Samaras stay on, but they're usually just more of a brown color. I also, and being a maple, it does have sap. You'll often see that in the fall too. If there's a wound on the tree or a twig breaks off, it will produce this really clear liquidy sap. You can taste that one too, just a taste. It's lightly sweet, definitely not pure sugar or anything like that, but just a little sweet here and there. And then again, I also really love the heartwood of box elders, which you'll only see if the tree has been cut in a certain place, especially on the main trunk. The heartwood is the innermost wood of a tree trunk. It's the strongest wood. And in box elders, it's this beautiful red color a lot of the time. So it's really gorgeous. So it's definitely something to look out for. Makes great coasters if you have the time.
Do we know what causes the variation in color of box elder twigs, Becca?
I think
Question
it
from John.
often has to do with age of the box elder twigs. So a lot of times the really young new growths will start out as green, and then they'll kind of shift into that orange and then shift into that purple. That's what I've seen a lot. And then every once in a while you will just get a random new growth twig that's just like purple for some reason. So it can vary a little bit, but it usually has to do with the age of the twig, I would say. I also wanted to point out that box elder and green ash trees look really similar from a distance and even close up, because they are both oppositely arranged trees and they both have similar bark and sometimes similar form in a way. So on the right is our green ash and on the left is our box elder. Now the bark is really similar. Both green ash and box elder kind of create that diamond shape that we were talking about. So it is apparent in both. I would say the one subtle difference is that green ash bark is usually a bit more gray and a little more chunkier almost, whereas the box elder bark is going to be more on the brown side, often looks slightly more smooth. It's a very subtle difference, but once you see enough box elder and green ash, you'll really start to notice it and it'll stick out, because these trees, being as tricky as they are, often grow next to each other. So you will often see green ash and box elder growing within a few feet of each other, even right next to each other. So, it's a very good thing to keep an eye out for. And then also with the form, green ash is usually very tall, very straight, whereas the box elder here can kind of be a little messy. I always like to compare it to my hair, like this, the green ash is my hair on a good day, while the box elder is maybe my hair on a bad day where I forgot some hairspray or something. It gets a little more chaotic on the box elder side. So definitely something that you can keep an eye out for from a distance. And again, with the buds, just because they are so similar trees, I do want to take a closer look at them, but they really stand out here. So on the left, you have that box elder twig, and you can see at the top, they have this really big fuzzy gray bud for the terminal bud. And then again, oppositely arranged. And then you can briefly see the very thin leaf scar that appears under the bud. And at the bottom here, you'll notice that the leaf scars touch for those two lateral buds down below. The leaf scars touch, they overlap often. So that's a big difference in comparison to the green ash twig, where, you know, it has that chocolate chip again, the leaf scars are not touching, and the leaf scars are more wide, you know, that wide smile again, if you want to remember it that way. And then also, like I mentioned with the Samaras, the box elder is always going to have paired Samaras, and they're always going to be a little thicker. So on the right here, you have an ash tree Samara, which is very thin and singular. But on the left, you have these beautiful box elder Samaras, make excellent helicopters. So they can look very similar from far away, but once you take the time to really look at those close-up details, they couldn't be any more different, you know? But also, box elder is tricky for another reason, when it's really young. So I have 3 pictures up here. 2 of the pictures are poison ivy. One of the picture is a box elder sapling that's super young. They look very surprisingly similar. I don't know if anyone wants to shout out or write in the chat their guesses for which one of these pictures is the box elder. Feel free to go ahead and take your guess. But it has definitely caused some mini panics in my walks in the woods when I've been walking through and suddenly I think I walked through some poison ivy, but then I have to double check. Oh, maybe it was just a box elder.
We have a guess for 1 and a guess for 2. We have another guess for number 2. Another guess for number 1. 1.
Oh, wow.
I know, they're rolling in.
Well,
Another 1, 1, 3.
I like it.
What do we got, Becca?
It's tricky, but number 1 is the box elder. Yes, I know that they look so similar, especially if you're just walking through quickly. The leaves are very similarly shaped. They're the very similar color. I would say that the one thing that helps me figure it out is that poison ivy are often lower to the ground and growing in these big clumps. And the poison ivy leaves are usually just a little more on the oval side, a little more wider as well. But it definitely takes a very close inspection if you're worried about it. So definitely take the time if you're walking and you're not sure if it was box elder or poison ivy, you know, really take a close up glance at it and you'll be able to figure it out. So with that, do we have any questions on the box elder? Yes, and less waxy is also good.
There was one question in the chat a little ways back about whether box elder Samaras need to be stratified over the winter to grow in the spring. Do you want to answer that? Otherwise, I just have a basic knowledge of that, I guess.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, so most maple seeds do require winter stratification in order to germinate in the spring. So if you were to just like grab a bunch of Samaras when they come off the tree and they're mature and then stick them in your house in a bowl or something until the next spring, they likely would have a really tough time germinating. They need that natural cold cycle to tell them that it's time to germinate.
So I have a question, Becca, on the box elder, the number 1 picture. It looked like in the center there were 5 leaves coming off the stem, but the older leaves there were only 3. Where did those other 2 go?
I think as it grows out more, those leaves will appear. Just when they're first starting out, they only happen as the ones. You can kind of see here that it's a much like mini version of the bigger one. There's that big one, see there, and then I believe as it grows larger, these will pop out more and also create a trifecta.
Yeah, that's a really
So
good
that would be another big difference between that and the poison ivy.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Thanks.
Do you know when the Samaras actually come out? I mean, when do they appear? Or ready to, you know.
I think it's late summer, fall, I believe.
Yeah, that would be when they're maturing for sure.
Okay.
I know. All right, are we ready for Cottonwoods? Here, let me just close the exorbitant number of tabs that I opened to try and figure out some of our questions here. There we go. Okay. And I will start sharing my screen. Oh, before I do, anybody have observations about Cottonwoods or photos they want to share before we jump in? Okay. We're just gonna jump right in then. Sharing screen. Okay. So Cottonwoods. We talked a decent bit about Cottonwood already through some of our earlier conversations. I'm just gonna buzz over some of the things that we've already talked about, but I will make sure to cover things we have not. So Cottonwood, one of the biggest things about Cottonwood is that this tree is part of what we call the super canopy. So in our river forest, which is where you guys were at Crosby Farm, there is the canopy layer, which is composed of a lot of the ash trees and hackberries and many cottonwoods as well. But there's also a layer above the canopy we call the super canopy. It's a lot more pronounced in like rainforests in South America and other places, but here in the floodplain forest, you basically just have a couple of really, really tall cottonwoods that stick out above the rest of the trees. It makes them exceptional nesting habitat for bald eagles and other large birds. They're very tall and very strong and can support those massive eagle nests that are built on their limbs. Let's see here. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit here. So a few features. We've covered the star pith already, right? So on the far right side, I actually found a really great story, and of course I just closed the tab, about the Native American explanation of this star in the pith. There's a really, really good story attached to it. If you guys are curious, I encourage you to go and look for that. But we've covered that quite a bit already, the pith, so I'm just going to move on from that. Cottonwood bark is kind of important to know because the next tree we're going to talk about, silver maple, sometimes rivals the cottonwood in size. So you can't just go on size alone. However, if you come across an absolute behemoth of a tree in the floodplain, it probably is cottonwood. However, it's good to know what the bark looks like. So the best way I have to describe the bark of cottonwood trees is that it's very ropey. The bark forms in these really long strips that seem to run down all the way to the base of the tree. Like I said, the silver maple is the only one that really rivals the size of the cottonwood in the floodplain. So you'll see the difference between the two later. The silver maple is much more peely. It like peels off in strips, where cottonwood is big and chunky and ropey. But again, if you see a tree that when you hug it, you can't even get your hands halfway around, it probably is cottonwood. The leaves of cottonwood are really special too. I know it's not part of Winter Tree ID, but I think it's one of the most cool features about this plant. The stem of the leaf, we call it a petiole, P-E-T-I-O-L-E. And they're special on cottonwood trees. Does anybody like notice anything, even from this photo, that's kind of weird about them? Maybe it's kind of hard to see. So
are they flat like other poplars?
yes, exactly. So common in the poplar family of trees is a flat petiole, and that produces a very cool reaction to wind. So when you watch the trees outside your house blow around in the wind, right, you see the leaves sort of just kind of flap, right, a little bit and get dragged by the wind. Because of the flat petiole on cottonwoods and other poplar trees, when they blow in the wind, the leaf like wildly flails back and forth. And that creates a really distinct image of the tree when it's blowing in the wind. So you can like tell cottonwoods from a really long ways away if you see the sort of like flashing leaves as they flap back and forth. And it also makes a really beautiful sound. I have extremely fond memories of when I first got to the U of M, and I used to hang out by the river all the time because my roommates and my dorm mates were super lame. And I would just go sit on the beach and listen to the cottonwood trees. It sounds a lot like rain or running water. It's like the perfect white noise. And I encourage you, if you don't already have a very clear memory of listening to this, next time you go out and you see a cottonwood tree fluttering in the breeze, take a moment to really drink in that sound that they make, because it is one of the coolest features of our floodplain forest, actually. Notice also the triangle shape of the leaf. It's where the tree gets its scientific name, deltoides, Populus deltoides. Delta is a triangle, and so their leaves are triangular, which separates them from a lot of other poplars like quaking aspen or yellow poplar. But yes, also quaking aspen, you guys probably recognize that name as well, and maybe even that tree. Another plant that has a flat petiole and seems to sort of shake in the breeze. That's where I got its name from. Any questions on cottonwood bark or pith or things like that? I think we're gonna look at twigs and flowers next really quick. Right on. Next slide, computer. Is that the next slide? Okay, where's my, okay, we're good. So we looked at the cottonwood twig already, but I'm just going to run down the features again really quick. The buds can vary from extremely large to quite small, but all of them are this conical shape where there's a very plump cone and usually accompanied by a sharp little tip. Not hurtful to the touch per se, but are quite pointy. The buds that are to become catkins, flowers, are oftentimes really juicy. And when you squeeze them, they can secrete a very sticky substance. However, this is one twig that oftentimes when we find them on the ground, like when we were out hanging out at Crosby and labeling these trees, we were looking for some twigs of cottonwood trees. As you probably noticed, we tried to tie them to the tree with the flagging because we were unable to, there's no twigs near the ground on a cottonwood tree most of the time. But oftentimes these buds already have fallen off. And the twigs we're finding are from the previous season before buds began to regrow. I find cottonwood buds in the ground sometimes, but less often than most other trees. And that's because cottonwoods have this really interesting behavior, and I think they share it with some other poplars, of just dropping their branches when they're no longer needed. You can see, I don't think I have in this photo, let's see, I'm looking at these twigs in the background of this one. See this little knob in this twig in the center picture here? It's kind of dark there. If you were to look at that twig close up, you'd see a bunch of lines really close together, and this area is sort of bulbous to some degree. That is a breaking point for cottonwood twigs. It's an area where the twig is a little bit weaker because it has so many striations there. It's actually made to break off under weight or as the twig begins to die off. And it's part of the reason why we don't see any limbs close to the ground with cottonwood trees, is because the tree is really efficient about dropping off twigs and branches that it doesn't need, which is great for the tree's health, but sort of dangerous for walkers by underneath on trails. Cottonwoods are notorious for just dropping limbs kind of randomly because they're attempting to grow as straight and tall and strong as they possibly can in the smallest amount of time. They're very, very fast growers. And so in that process, they just drop weight that they don't need sort of left and right, which is really, really cool. So I talked about the bud. The leaf scar is this sort of little diamond shape. That can vary quite a bit. Similar to the hackberry that we looked at, they sort of exist on these little protrusions on the twig. They sort of face up and outward a little bit. But they're really not all that distinct. There's so many more distinct things about cottonwood than the leaf scars. I typically don't look at that. The buds are a really great giveaway. The star pith is perfect giveaway. And the little break points in the twigs and the bumpiness of them is another really excellent way to identify them. In addition, also in the same middle photo, you can see these really big black spots in the twigs. Those are sites where other twigs were previously attached, but have since broken off in this perfect little like suction cup shape. So that is another excellent identifier. I'm sure the next time you guys pick up a cottonwood twig, you'll see some of these features and likely know what you're looking at, especially because you're probably standing under an enormous tree. Let's see here. Okay, so I talked about the tree being dioecious earlier, right? Oh no, it covered me up. D-I-O-E-C-I-O-U-S, dioecious. And that means that the tree is different between male and female trees. A lot of trees just are the same across the board. It's really, really hard to tell males from females. For cottonwoods, that's not the case. Both trees produce a catkin flower, C-A-T-K-I-N, which basically is like a conical flower or a pine cone shaped flower. But the males produce these bright red, gunky ones, and the females produce these light green, sort of a little more muted flowers. Yeah, I saw in the chat someone had said, you know, these are notoriously messy trees, and they are extremely messy. And in fact, they're messy in every single stage of their development. They drop twigs, they drop these big flowers that you know, usually in a rainstorm, right? We get a spring rainstorm and then you come outside and you find all these gross flowers all over the ground and they're just soggy and kind of nasty. Again, I just have really tactile memories of playing with them when I was a kid. But the female ones oftentimes stay attached, but sometimes they'll come down and you'll find them too. But both of them actually diverge and then come back to create these little bulbous green fruits after they've flowered, which of course then explode into cottony dust and coat the entire landscape near where they're found. So if you ever find these stalks of fruit on the cottonwood, it is fun to sort of pick them off and crack them open and see the developing fuzz inside. Otherwise, once they get dried up enough, they'll explode and release their cottonwood seeds into the world. Cottonwoods are the staple of the floodplain forest in a really big way. They soak up a ton of water when it floods. They provide excellent nesting habitat and food. And they really, they do a lot of soil erosion control as well near riverbanks. Where was I going with that? However, they are in sort of a critical condition right now in a big way. Mississippi Park Connection, which I realized we didn't even really introduce our organization at the beginning. I sort of forgot. We're a nonprofit partnered with the National Park Service in the Twin Cities. And we, in partnership, run our volunteer program. And through the volunteer program, we've been supporting our effort called Plant for the Future, which started with a gigantic survey of the national park in the Twin Cities along the Mississippi River. And we found very, very few sort of like teenage cottonwoods. Lots of little itty bitty cottonwoods and lots of gigantic cottonwoods, but very few of those in between developing trees. And that is likely due to a change in flooding conditions because, you know, in the Twin Cities, we've built dams on the river and altered the flooding stages of the ecosystem. And climate change is in a gigantic way affecting our flood cycles. Those of us who work on the river pay really close attention to that. And, you know, there's been a few years in recent memory where the flood pattern has been absolutely wild, honestly, even like completely flipped from what it was supposed to be. And for all the trees in the floodplain that depend on that water to flood in the spring and moisten the soil and enrich the ecosystem and then retreat, at which point they drop their seeds into that newly enriched soil, the flood stage is really, really, really important to them. Since cottonwoods drop their seeds in this cottony form, and it's intended to fall onto this newly fertilized and moist soil in the floodplain, when we get like an extra flood that sort of happens later in the summer or like right when all these trees are dropping their seeds, either the seeds get completely drowned out in the soil, the new saplings get completely destroyed, or all the seed just gets completely washed away. You know, it sits on the top of the water and then disappears when the flood disappears. It's really, really taking a toll on this species, and it's something that we're actively working to address by planting more cottonwoods in safe locations. But it is a challenge. So just a little bit about cottonwoods. I think they're extremely fascinating, and I would love to hear if you guys have questions about them. Otherwise, we're going to move on to silver maple. Okay. We've talked about them quite a bit, but I mean, I love these trees and I could talk about them forever. One of my favorite things about them, they're basically like giant water tanks, right? They sit in the ground and they soak up all this water. And I've heard a few stories, especially back when I was doing chainsaw work, of people when they were cutting down dangerous cottonwoods, they'd make that first cut into the tree and it would just absolutely spray water all over the place. I found a few cool videos of that. If you guys are interested, you should try and find them too. We're pushing time a little bit, so I'm going to run through silver maple quick. And then we'll do our quick little quiz and wrap it up with some future opportunities for you guys. So silver maple is our second maple of the day after box elder. Most of you guys have seen this already, so I'm going to jump to the next page. In fact, we've seen both of these images as well. So silver maple is a much more traditional maple than box elder in a big way. They have the classic maple leaf. They grow perfectly opposite in their growth, and they've got these pretty little bunches of buds on the ends of their twigs. This is unique to the silver maple in our river ecosystem. So if you're seeing an oppositely arranged tree and bright red buds with a little bit of scaling and fuzz on them, you got yourself a silver maple. Their lenticels are not all that helpful, I would say, but their leaf scars can be. It is similar to the box elder in that it's just a small sort of crescent shape underneath the twig. Once again, very closely meeting at the lateral intersection of those two buds, right? So it's hard to see in this photo here. They don't touch as much as box elder. They come close, but oftentimes don't completely touch. When they have leaves on though, most of the time the leaves do touch, but the leaf scars underneath typically do not. I think we've seen quite a bit of silver maple twig. If anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to answer, but I'm going to move on to the next slide. One of the big things about silver maples you'll notice, and I think this is a great actually winter tree ID feature, is that they flower out much sooner than everything else in the spring. Those of you who have silver maples on your lawns probably have noticed this. Very early on in the spring, they're some of the first to flower, and they burst into these little red cones with all kinds of little green appendages coming out of them. They're really, really, really pretty. But if you see a tree that's flowering in the early spring, it is very likely silver maple, especially if it's all these big bunches of red. They also have Samaras, similar to the box elder, right? These classic maple Samaras, but they're much thicker, they're much larger. I think the box elder is just such a weird maple, and so their Samaras are also just kind of weird, small and kind of goofy looking. Maples are very classic helicopter shape, right? And have a much wider angle between the two of them, where box elders are usually a pretty acute angle. These are almost a right angle, a 90-degree in between the Samaras. Very large and healthy looking most of the time. The leaf of silver maple is distinct from other maples in that it has very deep sinuses. I know we haven't talked much about leaves, and it's not really part of winter ID, but there's another vocab term for you. This pit in the leaf here, sort of the armpit of the leaf, is called a sinus. And silver maple has the deepest sinuses of all the maple species in the area. Sugar maple is extremely similar, right? That sort of flag of Canada shape, but the sinuses are much rounder and less deep. Red maples oftentimes only have sort of a 3-pointed shape. They can have 5 points, but oftentimes are sort of just round on the bottom like this. And box elder is different entirely in that it is a compound leaf. But if you sort of push the two lower leaves together into the upper leaf, it does take on more of a maple shape, which I think is a very cool evolutionary observation. I mentioned the bark of silver maple as well earlier when we were talking about cottonwoods. They do get very large. However, this bark looks nothing like cottonwood bark, especially when they get older like this. It does have a sort of a silver sheen to it, but it peels off in these huge chunks. Like in a, I just want to rip them off. But that is not always very great for the tree. So you can do a little bit if you're really into it, but most of the time we just let them be. But this very long peely bark is an excellent indication of a mature silver maple. So if you layer that with the buds and leaf scars and the flowers, you should be in pretty good shape to identify them. Okay, questions on silver maple. I know I flew through silver maple a little bit, but I do want to get through sort of checking our comprehension here at the end. Happy to take questions though.
Andrew?
Yes.
This is Rebecca. And I took a picture of this tree down there, and I'm wondering if it's as simple as a silver maple. It was peely bark, but really like in strips almost. So I don't know if I can show you a picture of it or.
Sure. I've been downloading some of the photos from the chat, and I'll be looking at them later. If you got the photo on your phone, I mean, I could take a look really quick. But I would say nearly everyone you see down there with long peely bark is probably silver maple. There's nothing really else notable that grows like that per se. It's not out of the question, but on average, it's more than likely silver maple.
So pronounced.
Yes, very much. Okay, so this is just a time to review really quick. If you have a piece of paper at home or you want to just answer in your head, feel free. It's 10 questions. The first 5 are using photos from the slideshow that we've seen already. And then the next 5 are using new photos that you guys have not seen yet. We've covered all these species, so the species you don't know is not an option. And each of them will be repeated 2 times. So in the first 5, it'll show up, and then in the second 5, it'll show up again. Okay? No need to shout out answers or put them in the chat or anything. We're going to go through all 10, and then we're going to run back through, and I'll give you the answers. So, and also I'll be sharing this slideshow after the presentation as well. So you guys can use this to review on your own. Okay. Question number 1. What is this tree? Once again, using photos that you guys have seen already. So if you know it, write it down. Give you a few seconds. And if you remember the number of the question you need to go back to, if I go too fast, I'm happy to go back. Question number 2. That's my hand, by the way. I'm proud of that. Question number 3. And no pressure if you're struggling at all. This is just for your own growth, and you can always practice later. Question number 4. Should be pretty fresh in your mind. Question number 5. So we've seen each tree once now. All right, then next questions are going to be photos we haven't seen yet. So here's question number 6. Number 7. The photo on the left is a little unclear, so I'll just describe it. It is a very messy looking tree with many, many, many pairs of dried Samaras hanging off of it. Question number 8. Number 9. And number 10. Okay, so does anybody need to go back to a question before I run through the answers? So I'm just going to go through quick because we just have a few minutes left. So number 1 is the box elder, right? Multicolored twigs, paired Samaras. Number 2 is the cottonwood. We got the star pith, undeniable, as well as the large green buds. Number 3, we've got the smiley face bud and the chocolate chip of the green ash, the diamond shaped bark. Number 4 is silver maple, bright red buds and peely bark. Number 5 is Hackberry with its angled terminal bud and corky, warty bark. 6 is Cottonwood, got the really juicy buds, majorly large tree. 7 is Box Elder as well. So white, fluffy buds and the leaf scar that meets in the middle, as well as the Samaras hanging off the tree. 8 is Hackberry again, angled terminal bud, and these are the dried drupes that you'll see on the tree throughout the year. 9 is Silver Maple once again, red buds, early flowering. And number 10 is Green Ash with the blonding of the bark and the chocolate chip bud and smiley face leaf scar. So hopefully that worked out pretty good for you guys. If you would like to review with that again, I'll be sharing this out after we finish up today. So we're going to talk about a few opportunities quick for you guys to use your tree ID skills if you would like to volunteer with us. We do have a major co-managed volunteer program with the National Park Service, and we need good identifiers for a few of our upcoming projects. Becca, do you want to talk about your survey?
Sure. So Andrew briefly mentioned our Plant for the Future campaign, which has been a 4-year campaign where we're trying to plant 15,000 trees. This is our last year, so we've already planted 12,000 trees. In 2021, we'll have to plant 3,000 more, so keep a lookout for those. But also, I have been wanting to track the survival rate of all the previous trees that we've planted throughout the years. So that's 12,000 trees that all need to be surveyed for, are they still alive? What type of tree they are? And so I'm hoping it'll be a really fun project where we can go and look back at all the work that's been done, while also keep an eye on the little trees that we've put so much hope in the future for. And so I think it'll be really great. So my information will be in the email sent out later, and you can definitely contact me so that I can keep you in the loop if you want to be a part of this survey.
Right on. Mike, you want to talk Crosby Crew?
Yeah, always want to talk Crosby Crew. Crosby Crew's been on a bit of a hiatus because of the gathering restrictions, but we meet bi-monthly at Crosby Farm to do habitat restoration work. This largely revolves around the adaptive silviculture for climate change project that we have going on deeper in the park. It's about a 20-minute walk from the pavilion where you all probably started your journeys at. I'm sure many of you are probably involved in the planting this spring or have seen the sites for yourself, but there are 24 fenced plots where we planted 1,100 trees in May. And these trees are from like 14 different species, many of which are, familiar friends, and others are the southern genotypes of trees that are already in Crosby Farm. Other trees that we planted, like southern pin oak, swamp white oak, yellow poplar, northern pecan, American sycamore, which has been doing really great, are pretty new to our floodplain forest, at least in this region of Minnesota. So we are trying to see what trees will do well here in the future. Crosby Farm will be losing 30 to 40% of its trees because of the emerald ash borer in the coming years, and this is a pretty major and almost existential threat to our floodplain forests. So we're trying to figure out what to replace those trees with, and our hypothesis is that a diverse array of tree species will be the way forward. So we're trying to bring in trees that will be future adapted and adapted to a warmer and wetter climate that we anticipate in the near future. So the Crosby Crew, we do maintain the fencing. From time to time, we collect data to help inform the research as part of a 20-year study with the University of Minnesota as our main partner. So if you want to get involved with that, we'll also be doing some work in the other parts of the park as well, removing some invasive burdock and maintaining a couple other planting sites. But there will be an option to join our mailing list on the survey that we pass out, or you can just email me directly, and my email will be provided in the follow-up that Andrew sends out.
Righteous. It is this cool new crew. You want to be part of the cool new crew? Join the Crosby Crew. Additionally, we have an opportunity to gain some leadership experience with our volunteer program. Jim Rowan in the chat and in our group here is part of this cohort already. When we start getting larger groups back out for volunteer events, we need volunteer leaders with us as well to help us lead groups of volunteers. It's really great job experience for young people who want to get into natural resources, and you get to be much more involved with your local habitat. So I'll provide more information in the email on that as well. Mike, I think you are sharing the link for the survey.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat right now, and it will also be provided in the email, in the follow-up email that Andrew will be sending out later today. And that's, again, just to get your feedback so we can figure out how we can best do virtual program moving forward as the pandemic continues.
We also, importantly, as we should mention to you all, I think we're going to be doing more of these in February, but we are shifting the location to Coldwater Spring, another park that's really near and dear to our hearts, where there will be 5 new trees. So you can keep increasing your list if you'd like to. Otherwise, hopefully see you around at some of our other volunteer events in the future. But keep an eye out for those coming up in February. If you'd like to support our program, you can go to parkconnection.org/donate. I'm going to leave that link in the follow-up email as well. We're a nonprofit partnering with the National Park Service, and becoming a member for $35 a year gets you some really, really cool backstage pass kind of things. Cheap tickets to our paddle share program where you can rent kayaks and canoes to go boating on the river. Talk about date night. Paddle share is an extremely cool experience. So if you're interested in becoming involved in supporting this program, we would super appreciate it. I got the quiz answers listed at the end. So if you guys are reviewing on your own, you can use that to your advantage. Otherwise, that is what we've got for you today. So yeah, major thank you to everyone who joined. I appreciate the Zoom applause. Yeah. I think Becca and Mike, unless you're super hungry, we're gonna hang around for a few minutes. So if you guys have questions you want to ask as people are departing, we would love to hear them. Otherwise, I'm going to end the recording here and say thank you to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending your morning with us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
We really missed having